built with Cake regarding a Stack Overflow post with the title CakePHP Save with Associations with More Than One Level. So I thought I would do a brief attempt to do that. So the user has posted a data array. So this would typically be something that you would receive as post data, and then you'd want to commit it to the database. But I'm going to just use that example data to show saving multiple new records to the database. To begin with, what I'm going to do is use that data array to create a migration to create multiple tables. So I'm going to call it create tables, and that'll show up under config migrations. Now I'm going to just paste this in temporarily, and then I'm going to use it. So I know from this the top of the array is a device. The next level is an array of modules. Inside the modules array there is a ports array, and the relationship with modules and ports, we're going to set that up as many to many, and the device has many modules. So let's start. Firstly, this is a migration, so we need to create a table. So the first table is going to be our devices table, and when it's an ID column, we add a column and it's an integer. When it's just a name column, it will be a string, and that will be enough just to create our devices table. So that's our first level. Now let's do our modules table. This table modules, and what I'm going to do is just copy everything and pop it here, and then do some copying and pasting. And so I've got 3 ID columns, which will all be integers, and I've got 1 column that is going to be a string. Now the modules belongs to devices, and devices has many modules, so we add a relationship column for that. So we want to call that device ID, and make sure that we set it to be an integer, and then once we're happy we can use create to complete creating the table in that migration. Now finally we have a ports table, in this case, and this is just a reminder, so when it's a port table, it's with an S. Tables are usually plurals because they hold many port records, and here we want to go, so we've got 2 name fields, string fields, so we go, just pop this in here. So grab this, physical port can be a string, and the name, I know there'll be 3 string columns here, and finally 1 integer column. Alright, so once we have that correct, we can use the create statement. Now, as we mentioned, modules is going to have a many-to-many relationship with ports, so we need a join table. So to create a join table, you take the table with the lowest alphabetical letters, so modules comes before M becomes before P, so we create a table called modules underscore ports. That's the convention for creating join tables. So it's the modules underscore ports. That's a join table. Now what we need to do is we need to add the foreign keys here to link the table. So it's going to be a module ID column, and let's just copy that, and this one will be a port ID column, and you can notice that's singular as well. Okay, so now we've designed our migration, and we now need to run our migration. So I'm just going to cut this out. Oops. Cut this out and go bin cake migrations, and let's have a look at status first and see if it blows up. It doesn't. It's looking good. And then just migrate, and we should have all green. If there's any errors, it'll have red text and you can go fix them. So once that's done, we should have in our I'm using SQLite as the database, so we should be able to open that with our SQLite browser, and you can see that we've got our tables defined here. So our next step is to ask Cake to do a bit of baking. So we're going to go Cake bake all, and you can see we've got 4 different database tables matching what we've created. But the interesting thing is that I'm only interested in creating tables for the 3 of them. So, and the reason for that is I don't actually need that models, views, or controllers for the join table. And the reason for that is, if I understand it correctly, is that the relationships are already nicely set up on ports. It belongs to many modules, and the same, vice versa. So everything's set up correctly, and we don't need to do baking of that intermediate table. Sometimes you might, if you're wanting to edit the join table or do things like that using web forms, but this will work for us just the way it is. Okay, so we now have our model views and controllers all baked. So now we want to go in, and we're creating a device record at the top level. So we'll go in and we'll make our own action here. We won't use any of the default ones. So we'll go, let's call it saveAssociated, because that's what we're doing. And let's paste in that data array that we're going to commit to the database. So to start with, we need to create a device entity. Now we can do several different things. We can go this devices, and then go new empty entity, and then do, if we have a look at the add, that's how they do it. They create an empty entity and then they patch it. But let's just skip that step and start with just new entity. And it's saying that we just need a data array. So let's pop the data array in, and then an options array. Now what do we need to include here to get multiple level saving? Let's just try it as a default. First thing we're going to do is we're going to dump and die. We're going to create the entity and then just dump and die it to the screen. So getting our, here's one I preferred earlier, but just pressing enter on that, it's dumping the device we've created to the screen. And notice that we already have a perfectly formatted array. And notice it's quite interesting. It's actually created an entity of the module, but you see the ports that for some reason they are not created into entities. So we've got a challenge because we need entities all the way down. If we're going to save entities to the database, that's an array. That's not going to work at all. So how do we make sure that we get entities? Well, this is where our options array comes in. Now, if you have a look at the saving data documentation, we've got a section under saving entities called saving associations, and the secret sauce is this associated option key. So we go associated, and then we say, okay, I want to build an entity with modules included, and I want to build an entity with the modules and nested posts as well. So the question is, has that fixed our problem? Will it now create entities? Let's press enter and have a look. It's looking, no, it hasn't worked. So still we've got an issue here. This should be and you can see what the problem is when you do a typo. Let's now have a look. And again, ports are still not working. So we haven't managed to create. So we go new entity, data, modules, ports. Now what is going on? Why is this not working? Associated. Let's have a look into our, that's good. That's good. Okay, what I'm looking for is that each parent has a property named after the child. So, module has many ports, and the device has many modules. So yeah, that's correct. So what's going on here? Associated. Can you see what I've done wrong? All right, so what we've done is we've got too much nesting of arrays. This is one of the things you need to watch out for in CakePHP. Let's see if now that fixes the problem. And let's expand it out. And we really, yes. So you can see now, once we get our array correct, our options array correct, that's something to really look out for. It's bitten me a lot of times, and obviously it's something to be mindful of when you're having difficulties. So now we've got our entities all being created. Let's now show a challenge. What can happen? So remember before I said that each device, any of the children, has this property that is accessible, allows it to be mass assigned. So let's see what happens when I comment it out, and notice how immediately the modules and all the children disappear. So that's something that's crucial. How could you make that work if you had this and you didn't want it to be mass assignable always, but you had to do it programmatically? Well, let's have a look at doing that. So we can do this. We go, what will we call it? We look at our documentation. So here we go. So the accessible property, we're looking for mass assignment. Okay. Set access, bypass guarding. Maybe we can just find it in the documentation here. looking for is we're looking for, probably someone knows what I'm searching for, but I've just forgotten temporarily. Let's go accessible. There we go. This is what we want, accessible fields. So I just forgot for a minute. So we go accessible fields, and we say, okay, for the device, even though I've got modules turned off, we want to actually say modules is accessible. And now, notice what happens. We're missing modules at the moment, if you have a look here. And then we have now gotten it back because we're now enabling a mass assignment to that. So these things can catch you out. And the reason why I'm showing you is so that you don't spend hours like I usually do chasing these things down. So now that we've got a multi-level nested array of entities, let's try and save it. So what we're going to do to save an entity, we go this. So the top level is devices. So we want to save our device, and what we'll get back is either a, you see the return is either a device or false. So if it's truthy, that means that there's a device in it. Let's have a look at it. And otherwise, what we need to do is go, well, why didn't it save? So grab hold of the errors that are stored in the device once you've tried to save it. So let's have a look at that. Let's firstly look at the successful thing. It returns an array, an object, a device with all the nested children. Notice how each one of the children has an ID associated with it because it's been committed to the database and it's returned that. So now we'll just simulate an error. So I'm just going to turn off just one of these things, and notice the array now is an error array because we've hit the validation. So we can see that if we get it wrong, it will tell us that what's wrong, and we can then display that to the user. Now from this point, what else might we want to do? Well, I've noticed that one thing that I often want to do is save additional data to the join table. Now in this example, each student is linked to multiple courses, many to many. Many students go to many courses, and each student needs to know for each course the days attended and the grade that they got for that course. And you can do that in two ways. Firstly, they mentioned that you can do it as an entity or an array. So let's firstly do the array format. So to do that, I might just copy that properly now. So we can put that here, and I'm going to create a field called extra data, and I'm just going to do that. All right, so that's what they recommend. So we're going to, in the join field between modules and ports, so the link table, we're going to just add this extra data. But in order to do that, we need to create, I'll just copy one of these, create an extra data field. Let's roll back our migration, which will delete all the tables and then migrate forward. And now, so it's given us what we can see here. So we've got it's given us extra data there. Now let's go and have a look at what. Notice the difference here. We've got a join data field in this port, and we've got no join data here. Let's see what the result of that is in the database. So if we have a look into our fields here, notice how the only record that's been committed is the one with the join data. So when we don't specify join data for everything, it only commits the join data record, and this one's just been left. So that's another real gotcha if you're wondering why things aren't working. So what you definitely need to do is specify the join data for all those nested records. So now we have a look again, expand out, and we can see that the join data is specified on both, and it's been converted to entities, so 5 and 8. And then if we look at the records, they're linked in the database, and our records are nicely added. Sorry, extra data in the join table has been added. That's one way of adding join data. Let's look at another way. So we have this ability here to, so we're going to just remove that. Now this time we're going to do it as entities. So before we save, we want to get our device to go for each. This is a bit device, for each device modules as module, for each module ports as port. What I want to do is I want to go port underscore join data equals new entity, and let's just make sure that's pulled in. And then we want to say extra data, and we'll make it really obvious. So we go unique ID. All right. So now this particular this is a particular way of doing it by adding an entity. Let's see what happens. So press enter, go and have a look at our database, and we can see in our join table that we've added the extra data by creating an entity, and it's committed to the database. So that's yeah, it depends how you want to do it. It doesn't really matter, but obviously you might want to avoid multiple levels of nested for loops for each loops. So that's another part of saving data to join tables. Now, what else can we do? Well, let's just finally go through some of the challenges. If you are adding functionality, just be very mindful that these accessible properties, like if you set up the migration perfectly and you have everything correctly set up to start with, all these things will just automatically happen. But what you need to be very careful of is if something doesn't seem to be saving, just check to make sure that your accessible fields are either switched on or they're listed in your accessible property. The other thing to look out for is that your relationships are defined correctly. So that is another thing that can cause a real issue when you attempt to save multiple levels of associated data. Now, interestingly enough, if you, let's have a look at that. Let's say, for example, we've got, let's have a look at our ports. So we've got port ID 1 and port ID 2. What we can do, so we go port ID, I wonder if we can do that. Let's try that. Let's have a look at saving data. Always go back to your documentation. Yeah, that looks about right. Let's see if that works. So what I've done now is I'm specifying stuff that already exists in the database for our ports. Let's see if it works. So we've got those ports ID 1 and 2, and what we're looking for here is we want to see 2 port IDs 1 and 2 instead of new ones. So let's see if that works. Press enter. Let's see what happens. Now we'll know it's successful if it returns, yeah, so notice how it's returned as those entities. So when we have a look here, we just, right, so we've got the 1 and 2 instead of, so we've basically linked these instead of actually creating new ones. So if you can do that, you can provide an array of underscore IDs, and that will allow you to link things as well. So really the sky's the limit with what you do with saving associated data. Just be very mindful of your accessible fields and all those sorts of things, so that you don't get caught out by things that just don't seem to save. You really need to be alert to that. So I hope that this video, although it might be long and a bit waffly, I hope it's been helpful to someone.